Since we have reached almost at the end of this section, but there is one topic which I wanted to discuss with you guys, that is how the objects and the primitives gets stored in JavaScript. Okay, because this is one of the topic where most of the beginners gets confused. Okay, so that is why we will write some code uh, first, and then we will see how that code works in JavaScript, how those things get stored in JavaScript. Okay, so without wasting our time, let's get into it. So now let's see an example of primitive values. Okay, so I'll create one variable, let first name, and I'll set it to Raunak, and then I will create another variable, friend's name. Okay, and what I will do, I will assign this first name as a value for this friend's name. Okay, so now what you guys think will happen? Let's log it out. First we will do a log of first name. Okay, so here we are getting Raunak, and then let's do a log of friend's name, and here, as you might have guessed already, we are getting the same value. So far so good. Okay, now let's change the value of this first name. Let's change it to Akhil. Okay, so now as you can see, in the first name, in the log of first name, we are getting Akhil, but in the log of friend's name, we are still getting Raunak, which is the old value of first name, right? Most of you guys will say, like, since the JavaScript executes the code or reads the code line by line, so this is an expected behavior, right? So now let's see an example of objects. Okay, and then we will see how all these things work in JavaScript. So now let's create an example of an object. I'll use const this time. Const, actually let's pick something from the existing code, because I don't want to write it over and over again the same thing. Let's pick this user detail. Let's see where, yeah, okay, let's pick this one. So here we have an object. Let's make it user1 details. Okay, and we will do the same thing what we have done earlier. We have created one variable, we have assigned some value in it, and then we have created another variable. We have assigned the first variable as a value of that new one. Okay, so that is what we are going to do here. So const user 2 details. Okay, and what we will do, we will assign this user1 details here. Okay, and then what I will do in user2 details, I will change some value like we did earlier. Okay, in user2 details, let's say year of birth, I'll change it to 1998. Okay, so now let's log it out. User1 details and user2 details. Okay, so before logging it, I wanted you guys to guess, like, what should be the output for this user1 details object and user2 details object. Okay, so take your time and pause the video and guess the output for these two. Okay, fine. So now we will see the values which we are getting for these two objects. Okay, user1 details and user2 details. So now here is the twist. In user 2 details, we are getting name Raunak and year of birth 1998. That is fine. That is totally fine because we have changed in user 2 details year of birth as 1998. Okay. But if you see in user 1 details also we are getting this 1998. Why is that so? We haven't changed user 1 details dot year of birth, right? We have only changed this variable's year of birth. Then why it is reflecting the same change in the user 1 details object also? So let's find out how all these things gets stored in JavaScript. Okay, because this is one of the thing which is way more confusing for most of the beginners. So let's see. Okay, so before seeing the actual example, we have to review few basics which we have learned in the beginning. That is primitive values. So in primitive values we have number, string, boolean, undefined, null, symbol, big int. Okay, and apart from primitives we have objects. So in objects we have arrays, object literals, functions, and many more. Okay, so basically apart from primitive values everything else is an object in JavaScript, right? So far so good. And now let's consider JavaScript engine as well, because here is where our variables gets stored, right? So the objects whatever we create gets stored in the heap. Okay, and the primitive values whatever we create gets stored in the execution context, which basically gets executed in the call stack. Okay, so for the sake of simplicity we will say like primitive values get stored in the call stack and the objects will get stored in the heap. And why objects get stored in the heap? Because in heap we have a infinity memory pool. We can store as much as bigger data we want. That is why the bigger objects, bigger values like objects get stored in the heap, and the smaller values get stored in the call stack in the execution context. Okay, so now let's see the code which we have wrote how it gets stored in the JavaScript. Okay, so here are our examples whatever we have wrote just now. This is for primitive values, this is for reference values. Okay, and here we have some data in the call stack and a heap. Okay, so let's identify the primitive values first. So now whenever we create a variable, for example we have created a first name with a let variable declaration and we have assigned some value in it. So what happens is in call stack an identifier with that first name will get created. Okay, and an address will get created which holds some value. And what will be the value? Value will be the one which we have assigned to that variable. That means whatever variable we create, it does not point to that value directly. Instead, it points to the address in the call stack. Okay, and that address holds some value in it. Okay, so now in this next line what we have done, we have created another variable in which we have assigned first name as a value. So now how it will work in the call stack? So the friend's name, the second variable which we have created, will start pointing to the first address. Okay, it will not create a new address because we already have the same value in one address. Okay, so it will create a new identifier with that friend's name. Okay, and which will simply point to the address which is D001, which holds some value of this like Raunak. Okay, so now Let's see the next line. In next line, what we have done is we have assigned some value to that first name. Then how it works in call stack. So as soon as we assign some value in the first name, a new address will get created which holds that value. Okay, because same address cannot hold multiple values, or we can say like one address cannot change its value. It will hold only one value. Okay, so the address D001 will not change its value, which is Raunak right now. It will not make it Akhil instead of Raunak, because if it does so, then both of the console logs like first name and friend's name will start giving us Ron Akhil. Okay, in both the logs we'll start getting Akhil. Okay, because we have updated the value of an address, so that is why it never updates the value of an address. Instead, it creates a new address with the updated value, whatever we have passed here. So, for the first name, we have passed another value, we have assigned another value, a new address gets generated with that new value, and the first name will simply start pointing to that new address. Okay, so that is the reason why we are getting Akhil in first name console log and Ronak in the friend's name console log, because friend's name is pointing to the old address, and first name, since we have updated the value of this first name, it started pointing to the new address which holds the value which is Akhil. Okay, so this is how the primitive values gets stored and works in the call stack. Okay, so now let's see an example of user details object or reference value objects. Okay, and why it worked in such a weird way, that is also we will see, because you have seen like both the console logs were giving 1998 for the year of birth, right? So let's find out why that happened. So as soon as we create a user2 details variable, user1 details variable, a new address will get generated, obviously, right? And I have told you guys like the objects or the bigger values whichever we create gets stored into the heap. Okay, so the same thing will happen here. This object will get stored into the heap in the same way how the primitive values gets stored into the call stack execution context. Okay, we have the address and the value here. We have some address here in the heap, and the value of that address, we have this object stored in it. So how this gets stored into the call stack is the question here. So what happens is, in call stack also one address will get generated and user1 details will start pointing to that address. Fine. So now as the value of this new address, the address which got generated into the heap gets stored, okay, as a value for the address which we have in the call stack for this user1 details. So you can say like the objects got stored into the heap, we got some address there, and then we have created one variable user1 details. For this, one address got generated into the call stack. In call stack, the address which got generated in the heap gets stored as a reference. That is the reason why we call objects as reference types in perspective of storing the value, okay, or memory allocation. And the primitive variables we call primitive types because they get stored in the call stack. Okay, so I hope you guys are clear so far. So now let's see what happens. We have created another variable which is user2 details. Here also we have assigned user1 details as a value. So what will happen? User2 details also will start pointing to the same address which got created for the user1 details. Okay, so right now both the variables, both the identifiers are pointing to the same address. Okay, which stores some address as a reference for this memory heap, and then that address points to some data which is stored in the heap, which holds some value, which is an object here. Okay, so now we are going to get the answer of the question, like why it started showing 1998 for both the logs. So in the next line, as you can see, we have updated the user2 details dot year of birth as 1998, right? So what will happen? We have changed the value of year of birth from 1992 to 1998, right? That means we have changed the value of the data which is stored in the heap, not in the call stack. That means these two things, these two identifiers are still pointing to the same address, because we haven't changed the value of this address itself, right? We have changed the value of this address value which holds some data in it. Okay, it is like you got a pizza box. Okay, and you have changed the pizza from inside that box. You have stored, we can say, a pencil box inside of that pizza box. Okay, so you are still holding that pizza box. Okay, you haven't changed that pizza box itself, you just changed the content which is inside of that pizza box. I hope you guys are getting my point, right? So here we haven't changed the value of this address. The value this address have, this address holds. Okay, we have changed the value of this address which is stored in the heap and which is stored as a reference for this address in the call stack. Okay, so since we haven't changed anything for this uh, user2 details as a value, that is why we are not getting any error. Because if you have noticed, we have used const here, and const simply means if the variable is declared by const variable declaration, we cannot change its value, otherwise you will get the error, right? So that is what is happening here. We haven't changed its value, we have changed the value which is stored inside of this value. Okay, so here is the catch. Const declarations throws error only in case of primitives, not in case of objects. And obviously it will throw an error only if you replace the complete data. For example, in user2 details, instead of user2 details dot year of birth, if you replace the value of user2 details completely, for example, if you store an array or boolean value or something in user2 details directly, then you will get the error obviously. Okay, so that was the reason why after updating the value of user2 details dot year of birth, it is reflecting in both the console logs, because both the console logs are pointing to the same address which holds the same value. We haven't changed the value which these address are pointing to. We have changed the value of the address which is stored in the heap, and that address is stored as a value of this address where these two are pointing. Okay, so that is how the primitive values and the reference types works in the JavaScript. This is how they get stored in the JavaScript. Okay.